Welcome to part 71 of my video series on how to use Blender 2.7. In this video, I'll be talking all about animation, specifically how to animate a walk cycle on a simple human character. On the screen right now, I have a very simple character. It is a mesh that's rigged with an armature setup. And you can actually go ahead and download this exact file that's on your screen right now in the description area below. So you can go ahead and download that, open it up for yourself in Blender, and follow along with me in this tutorial. This rig setup, if you're not sure how to rig a character using bones, I'll put a link on the screen right now to my mini-series on how to rig a Minecraft character from start to finish. Don't get hung up on the fact that it's a Minecraft character. Yes, it's not organic, but it has, in all those videos, had a very detailed and complex armature setup, including a face rig setup. But more importantly, just like with this simple stick person's armature, there are constraints on some of the bones which will allow animation to happen easier. There are a couple of extra feet bones down here which are called IK, or inverse kinematic. They're IK targets, and that means that you can actually grab the feet bones and just press G to move them, or of course use the gizmo, and you can pose the leg in any which way that you want just by dragging on one bone, instead of having to rotate the upper leg bone and the lower leg bone to pose the entire leg. You have to pose them both separately if you didn't have an IK setup. So there are a few extra bones here. There is a bone in the middle between his legs and the ground. That's the parent bone. We're in pose mode, of course, now, and you can move that bone around to move the entire armature around. It's sort of just where the character is. There are these two feet bones. I talked about those already. And there are two knee IK bones which you can move around, and you can't tell right now, but if I move that leg up to bend the leg and I move the knee bone around, it'll control or make the knee point at that bone at all times. So you can make your knees kind of move around like that. Great. I'll press A few times and Alt G a few times to clear out the location. You have to press Alt G a few times with IK bones. That's just a plug-in Blender that's been there pretty much forever. So let's go ahead and jump into making a walk cycle. In this video, I'm going to be showing you how to make a fairly decent walk cycle. I'm not a seasoned animator, but I did take several animation classes back when I was in university taking a degree in new media. That was over 10 years ago now, actually. But let's go ahead and jump in. I'm going to go to my side view, and actually I need a few more windows on my screen, actually just one more for now. So I'm going to drag the top of my timeline window up down here. I'll grab and left click this little triangle area, and I'll drag it straight down with my left mouse button, and I'm going to make this extra timeline into a dope sheet window. A dope sheet is, of course, basically a more advanced timeline that lets you select and move and delete keyframes, and you can actually scale your whole animation. We'll do that at the end of this video. We're going to start animating now and posing our character, so I'm going to turn on my record button and I'll zoom out, and from our side view I want to create the 4 poses of a walk cycle. If you're not sure what the 4 poses or how a walk cycle would look from pose to pose, I encourage you to actually go to Pinterest. Yes, it's not just for pictures of cupcakes and Christmas cookies and interior decorating. It actually has boards that people have made on lots of topics, including, I found a whole bunch of great images on Pinterest of walk cycle animations, and you can see it from all different directions. So that's kind of what I'm going from here. The first pose of the 4 poses in a walk cycle is your stride pose, or I call it the Y pose. It looks like a character is in a Y pose, but upside down. So I'm going to drag each foot one back and one forward. I'm on frame. Actually, I'm going to undo that because I want to go back to frame 0. I'll drag one back and one forward. And because IK targets are not directly attached to the leg bones, there can be a gap here, but that's okay. We're going to move the hips bone straight down so our feet now meet those IK target bones. Now it's important to know that I'm going to be making just one cycle, or 2 steps of the walk cycle, one where the left foot, or in this case the right foot, starts forward, and one where the left foot starts forward. So basically 2 steps. In the next video I'm going to be showing you how to loop that to make a sequence of walking and make your character walk from point A to point B using just one animated walk cycle. And in the next video I'll be showing you how to make your character walk along a path that's of course invisible, but then you can make your character walk up and down hills and around corners and do whatever you want because your character is constrained to a path while they're walking. So let's go ahead and make this animation. I've got my first pose. I'm not moving this front and back. We're going to animate him just in one position, like he's on a treadmill. Great. I only have keyframes on the hips and the 2 feet bones for now. We'll add more later. I'll go 10 frames later, and I'm going to go to my next pose, which is the falling forward pose. Now, because we're leaving this hips bone in the middle, I'm going to drag this foot back because it's eventually going to get back there, and then back to the forward again. I'll drag it just a little bit back to maybe right about there, and this leg's going to come off the ground now and kind of come forward. It looks now like he's kind of falling forward a little bit, and that's a good thing. I'm going to make his hips go a little bit down here, and so now we have keyframes on all the same 3 bones. Let's see how that looks. I might move that up a little bit and these in a little bit to make that pose a little bit taller. Maybe just like that, and move those back. You never want to have hyperextended or almost never have hyperextended legs and arms. That just does not look good. So let's see how it looks. It goes down some. Great. The next pose is the passing pose, and that's pose number 3, and that is exactly what it sounds like. I'm going to move this foot to right below the hips essentially. I'll grab the hips and move them up so we have almost a straight leg there, and then this foot's going to be kind of just passing like that. Great. Let's go ahead to the 4th pose and the final pose before we have the reverse of our first pose again. And the 4th pose is the falling forward, which is also the highest pose where your hips are the highest. So what I'll do is I'll drag this back a little bit because this one is always going to be moving back until it goes to the opposite Y pose. And then I'm going to move the hips just a little bit up because that should be the highest pose there. Yeah, that's pretty good. I want to see if I can get a little bit higher without hyperextending too much. Okay, and of course this one continues to swing, so I'm going to move that forward. So this and this are about parallel. And let's see how that looks. I like that. It's looking pretty good. So there are only 4 poses here, and that's because the next pose is an exact flip on the x-axis of our first Y pose. In other words, in this first Y pose, his right leg is forward, his back leg is, or his left leg is back, and in the next pose, pose number 5, it's just a reverse of that. So in other words, the right leg is going to be at the back and the left leg is forward, the opposite. Now Blender has a built-in function where you can actually copy and paste a pose, but then you can paste a flipped pose, and that's assuming that all of your bones are named correctly. In this case, if I select all my bones over here in the bones tab, you can see that this bone is named back, this one is named head. All the left and right bones end in capital or dot capital L or dot capital R, and that's how you should be naming things, I think. And it has worked in the past, but for some reason in this setup, if I try to go to the first pose, and I'll select all the bones and I'll press Control C, or I can go to pose and where is it? Copy pose, and then I'll go to frame 40, and if I go to pose and paste X flipped pose, it should work. And yeah, it just kind of just pastes the same first pose again. It doesn't flip it properly, and I'm not sure that's because I have something named wrong or I'm not using the right naming conventions. I know you can start bone names with capital R and then IGHT, and then it'll find that at the beginning of a bone name as well, but I thought capital L and capital R at the end with a dot before it would work too. It's not, so I'm going to quickly actually speed up this part of the video. I'm going to just undo that keyframe. How I'm going to do this is I'm going to go to my first frame and put my 3D cursor under the foot, and I'm going to go to the next frame, and that way I know where this foot should go. In fact, what I'll do first though is I'm going to select the hips on that first keyframe because I'm basically copying it over here, and I'm going to press Shift S, and I'm going to say cursor to selected. It'll put my 3D cursor with the Shift S menu. I can put that 3D cursor where the hips are, and then over here on this frame I can press Shift S and I can say the opposite, not cursor to selected but selection to cursor, and so I can move my selected hips bone back down to the same exact location in both of those frames. Okay, so that is looking pretty good there. I don't want it totally straight though, and let's go ahead and see where that back foot is. It's right about there. So on that keyframe it needs to go there. So I'm going to speed this next part of the video up because I'm going to duplicate these 3 keyframes, but the opposite. Alright, so I've got those duplicate or flipped keyframes now. Let's go ahead and scrub through. We're starting off in our first stride or Y pose. We go to our falling forward pose. We go to our passing pose. We go to our falling forward. This is the tall pose. And then we're going to reverse. Now we're in the opposite Y pose. We have a falling pose, a passing pose. In fact, I'm going to move that foot a little bit forward. And now we're at our last falling forward pose or tall pose. What I can do now, because we need to have the same keyframe at the start and at the end, I'm going to select just in this top dope sheet summary row. I can right click on that and then I can press Shift D to duplicate those keyframes or all that entire row of keyframes. I'll move it down to here. So now we have an 80 frame walk cycle, except that we don't want to actually play 2 versions of this keyframe, and I want to see how my walk cycle looks smoothly again and again and again. So what I'll do here is I'm actually going to start playing down here on my timeline my animation at frame 0 to include this first keyframe. But now I don't want to have it play both versions, so I'm going to cut off the timeline right at frame 79. So I'm going to change my end value to frame 79. So now, as you can see, this is past the end. So if we press play right from the beginning, I'll press Alt A. Alt A is the keyboard to play. You'll see the animation playing, and you don't see a jitter at the end because it's not playing 2 copies of the same keyframe. Now what I'm watching out here for is any kind of weird hyper extending where the leg kind of jiggles, and that might mean I have to move my hips down a little bit, but it's looking okay. Yeah, I'm not too unhappy with that. It's a little bit of jiggle on that leg or the inner crux of that knee right there, but I'm happy with it. Let's go ahead and continue. The next thing I want to do is actually not the arms yet. The arms are not the most important or most difficult part. It's actually the hips, because if you're looking at your character from the front and they're walking, whoop, what happened there? Oh, you know what? I use the snap feature too much, so I'm going to move these feet side to side. I'll just do this very quickly. Yeah, that's because I was using the snap feature to move the feet to the opposite location, not thinking on the x-axis or in the 3rd dimension as well. So now if I look at my character walking from the front, that one might be too far over still. You don't walk like this. Your hips swing and move side to side, and they do a whole bunch of things that we're going to just basically touch on in this video. Again, I'm not a seasoned animator, so my walk cycle is not going to look good as some other people's walk cycles, but it'll be on its way. So this hips bone is going to move to keep yourself balanced, or this character balanced, and that means they're going to be moving side to side like that. You're also going to be swinging your hips a little bit. You're also going to be rotating them on the Z-axis forward and back. So we're going to do all of those things quite quickly. First thing we'll do is balance our character. Right now my character is in his first Y pose, and that means that we don't have to worry too much about side to side at all. But as soon as you lift one foot off the ground, obviously if you were like that, you would fall over. Well, if you're in the middle over your center where your center of balance was before, you're still not very balanced. So you actually lean over a little bit depending on where your center of gravity is. But let's go ahead now and move it over just a little bit on that frame, and then I'll go to the next frame, and our foot is still off the ground, but it's going to be in fact even more over. So this one's a little bit over, and this one's even more, and then this one's going to be not in the center again, but just a little bit over. So again, a little bit, a lot, a little bit, and then our foot's back down on the ground, and so we're centered again. So again, we'll go here, it'll be a little bit over in the opposite direction, and then a little bit on this one here, and this one's going to be the most off center. So let's go ahead and see how this looks. If I play from my front view, you can see what's happening now. It's looking okay, but again, your hips rotate in lots of ways. The next way I'm going to do this is I'm going to go to my top view, and what we're going to be doing is rotating the hips on the Z-axis, or hips might want to kind of be tilted forward. In other words, basically just like that, but not so much to make it kind of exaggerated. Again, it depends on your character. If you're animating a robot, it's going to be a very different walk cycle animation with a very different hip movement than if you're animating a voluptuous woman with hips and that are swaying. So just keep that in mind. Of course, this is sort of a generic walk cycle. If your character also is expressing different emotions like sadness or glee, then they're going to have very different walks as well. So it kind of depends on their emotion and the specific character that you're animating. So here with this right leg forward, I'm going to rotate the hips so that they're pointing in that direction, which will actually give us more of a bent leg, which is nice. So I'm actually going to go to my top view and I'll tap R, and that will rotate the hips. You'll see them pointing kind of that way now. I'll do that again like that. I'll go to the opposite Y pose and do the exact same thing. Again, I don't have to ever do this keyframe down here because we can just duplicate the first one again, but you'll notice that because I have 2 keyframes between, actually 3 keyframes between each Y pose, I have to do the hip swinging in each one. So in this one, they started off at the beginning like that. We're going to go a little bit less, and then maybe that one will be centered actually, and then that one will be kind of going in the opposite direction because the next one is the most exaggerated in the opposite direction. Let's go and do the exact same thing. We're going to go a little bit tilted, and then not rotated at all or tilted at all, and then this one's going to be tilted or rotated in the opposite direction. And then this one I can just duplicate from the first keyframe, Shift D, and move it over. So now, in fact, that one maybe rotated a little bit too much there. Let's see how that one looks. That is my Y pose. I'm going to rotate that a little bit less. That one's centered, that one's rotated a little bit, and that one's rotated a lot. So good. Last thing I want to do here for the hips is I want to rotate them like they are doing the cha-cha, okay? So I'm not exactly sure how this would go. I think you rotate your hip kind of up on the side that is your straight leg, but that's only really going to happen when you're off the ground. So at the passing pose right there, it's probably going to be the most exaggerated like that, and then a little bit less exaggerated there, and then be a little bit still there, but this one won't be at all. And then right at that one, it's going to be the most exaggerated, and then not as much, and then again not as much in that one. So we're doing pretty good here. Again, I'll duplicate this first keyframe. I'm not sure if we made any changes, but it doesn't hurt. So let's go ahead and kind of go from my perspective view, or just a user view. I'll do a quick save, and I'll press Alt-A, and we'll see how the walk cycle is looking. Again, this is a very slow walk cycle, and at the end of this video I'll be talking about how to actually make it a loopable walk cycle that's not just relying on your length of your timeline, and we'll be adding an extra frame in to make it really loopable. But it's looking pretty good right now. Let's go ahead and work on the arms. So I'll press Escape to stop my animation from playing. And of course, this is not a very good model, so there are no shoulders here. What I actually want to do before I do the arms, though, is I want to animate the spine. Now, normally there would be a few bones for the spine. There would be like a little spine section with bone segments that can bend. And then there would be a bigger rib cage section on a better rig than this, because your ribs or your back doesn't really bend where your whole rib cage is, kind of like a solid block, but your back bends sort of in the bottom section. We don't have that here, so I'm actually going to rotate the character in the opposite direction that his legs are on the Z-axis. So I mean, like, I'll tap R and then Z, so like that, when you kind of rotate your shoulders like that when you're walking, but you do it with the opposite direction of your hips. So if this is the hips going kind of that way, then your shoulders will go kind of that way. So from the top view, you can see that our legs are like that, so we'll do the opposite on frame 1, or on frame 0 rather, with the shoulders, and then in the opposite Y pose, I'll do the opposite, and then we'll just duplicate that one for the end later. So that's looking pretty good to me. Because we don't have any other keyframes there, it just kind of goes from point A to point B back to point A without having to do all the keyframes in the middle. So it's looking pretty good to me. We also want to make the character kind of sway, kind of like that a little bit when they're walking. So what I'm going to do is when he gets up to kind of his passing pose, we're going to move it a little bit over like that because he's keeping his balance a little bit. And again, we're going to go a little bit before that. And actually, that's already sort of happening because of the hips. Actually, no, it's good because we don't need a frame in between because this is the backbone, which we haven't done any other keyframes on right there. So that works. It keeps it simple for us there. We don't need one there, in other words. And then on this keyframe, we want him to kind of be leaning over like that. And you can decide how exaggerated you want to be. This looks kind of like a cowboy moseying saunter, and that's okay. Let's see how it looks. Okay, I think we're pretty much ready for the arms now. So I'm going to go to my first keyframe. I'm actually going to go to my rotate gizmo here, and I'm going to change the gizmo orientation to normal or local. It doesn't really matter in this case. And I'm going to rotate the arms down so they're kind of at his sides, and that helps by having your local gizmo active and not your global gizmo. And so do the same thing over here. And again, the shoulders or the armpits don't deform very well here at all, but that's okay. It's not really for a production. You would want to have some shoulder bones there so you can raise and lower the shoulders. Okay, so we have two keyframes at the beginning. We're going to do some animation though. We had them rotated in the right way, so it's kind of hugging the body. But of course, on a Y pose, you have your arms splayed out, and it's the opposite from the leg. So I'm going to make that arm stick out. It's the opposite arm from the leg that's pointing forward. And let's go to that arm and make it go back. If we go to our side view, we still want to make sure that we don't just use the R key because that's rotating on the global axes. We want to actually grab our local handles there. How is that looking? Well, it kind of looks like he's walking a little bit too much with his arm back. So I'm going to have the arm go out a little bit. That one, it happens to be the X local axis, and on this one happens to be the local Z axis. Okay, let's go to the opposite pose, and we want to have it doing the opposite, of course. Let's go ahead, and I'm going to rotate it kind of like that, and kind of like that. I'm not sure how well this is going to work out for me, because I'm using these funny local axes, but I'm trying my best to get the arms kind of pointing from the side in the opposite direction as the legs, and hopefully it'll work out. I might have to do some adjusting here. I really wish I'd put some shoulders on this character. Again, that one looks like it's really kind of just in the body there. It's not pointing out at all, so I might do that just a little bit. And of course we can duplicate these keyframes at the beginning to the end. Let's see how this looks. We might get away with it. You can see right there though that the arms hug the body at the Y poses, but then they go quite far out at the passing pose. So I might go to those frames now and rotate the arms inwards. Again, I'm using my local gizmos with my, well, the local gizmo handles from the local gizmo orientation. So now we have a nice tight pass of the arms right next to the body. I'll do the same thing on the other passing pose from the front view. I can grab this one and move it there, and this one right about there. So let's go and see how this looks just from a random kind of a view. It's looking pretty good to me. We need a little bit more detail in the arms though, and we need to introduce a little bit of a bobble in, I think, the back and the head. I'm not going to worry about the neck in this video. You might want to add a little bit of stuff in there too. You'll see what once we start working on the head. The arms though aren't quite doing the right thing. The arms need some drag. Drag is one of the principles of animation. I'm going to, actually I'll leave my gizmo on local for now. What I mean by drag is that when this forearm is going back, you don't want to have the arm in a straight line. That won't make for very good animation. So actually, by the time that the arm starts to go, and we're going to not stick to the same keyframes anymore, to right about there, the forearm's going to be, in fact, I'm just going to use the R key. That should work. This forearm's going to be dragging a little bit. That's one of the principles of animation, but of course, it's not going to drag Alt-R on that keyframe, so I'll clear the animation there, or the pose there, and it's going to start dragging. It's going to continue to drag, probably even more towards the end. So I'll tap R there, and then by the time it gets to the opposite pose, I'll press Alt R, and it's going to be straight again. So it kind of snaps back at the last moment, and that'll make for a better, and it'll make for a better animation. But it, depending on how quick you want that snap to be, I can move that keyframe around just until I get the look that I want. I have to do the same thing to the other arm, so I'm going to select this one, and it's going to start off coming forward, but I'll tap I to insert a rotation keyframe, and then I'm going to bring it forward, and this one can be straight because you obviously can't bend it that way. That doesn't work. I'll insert another one there, so I'll tap I and rotation, and then again we're going to come back. I'm going to try to match the other arm to right about there, and it's going to be dragging behind at this point, like it's dragging like a piece of cloth in the air, and then by right about there it's going to be dragging even more, and then here I'll tap Alt R to clear out its rotation. So now let's see what we have. It's looking pretty good to me. Alright, the last thing we're going to do here is work on the head. We want some head bobble action here, so I'm going to select the head bone. Let's go from our side view. I still have the local gizmo or local gizmo orientation set, and that's okay. The front of the character's face is this face right here. It's not that one, it's this one there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, at the Y pose, I think right about there is when you start leaning forward. So just after the Y pose, again, we're not going to stick to the same increments anymore. So right about there, and then right after the passing pose, just before the falling forward pose, is when it's going to be tilted back a little bit. So again, forward when you're just kind of going down to your falling pose. Just before that, right there on my frame 6. And then on my frame 26, that's when it's going to be leaning back. So we're going to copy that on the other side. So right there, it's going to be forward. I want to make sure I'm using the right handles there. And then on frame, or right before that one, I'm going to have it go back a little bit. Let's see how that looks. Again, our animation is going quite slowly here. What I might need to do actually is put a keyframe that matches this one equally past this one. That might help that. Yeah, that helped that. We're going to be chopping off the end of this animation when we do our walk cycle that actually repeats itself. We're going to make this character actually walk over a hill in the next tutorial. But it's looking pretty good to me. What I also might do is go through and animate the head looking a little bit side to side just to add some realism, and I might make the head tilt a little bit. In fact, I might just do both of those in one step. So in the first keyframe, I'm going to put his head tilted towards actually no, it's going to be in the upper pose. It's going to be tilted over to help his center of balance a little bit. Same thing in the opposite one. And I think on that pose, I'm going to make the character look in the direction that they're kind of pointing their opposite leg away from, if that makes any sense. So they're pointing their heads, oops, I put that in the wrong frame. They're going to be looking kind of towards the inside of where their leg is pointing, if that makes sense. Let's go and see how that looks. No, that's the wrong way. I'm going to press escape. I'm going to go to the exact opposite there. They're going to look more, whoops, I'm going to need the head bone there. They're going to look more towards their front leg direction. So there and there. Let's see how that looks. Yeah, I think I'm going to undo that. That didn't work out too well. I think that's because I'm using the local direction probably more than I should be on the gizmo. Let's see how that looks. Yeah, I've got a funny keyframe there, and that's because of the side to side motion that I did. So I'm just not gonna, I'm gonna undo a few times. And I think it's going to look pretty good now. I'm not going to worry about the side-to-side motion of the head too much, or the turning of the head. But this is a good starting point for a walk cycle animation. The last thing I want to do in this video is speed up our walk cycle and chop off the end, because when we make a repeating one, we don't want to have any of these extra keyframes. We want it to end right at frame 79. So what I'll do actually is I'm going to select all the bones. I'll press A with my mouse. In this window, I have to select one of the bones first in pose mode. Then I can press A a few times. It gets all the bones. And our frame 79, right before the last repeat pose, I'm going to tap I with my mouse in this window, and that will insert a new keyframe. I'll select Loc Rot Scale for all three deformation types, and now I can select anything that's off the trailing end. Anything after that frame 79 I want to delete, so I'll tap X now, delete keyframes, and so now I have a truly self-contained walk cycle with no repeating frames. This frame here, all these keyframes here, are where they should be right before it goes back to frame 1. I have some extra keyframes though. I don't have any keyframes on this kind of master parent bone or the knees. Actually, I didn't do the knees in this video. Maybe I'll add those to the very last moment here. I'm going to get rid of, by box selecting with the B key, I can now box select and then X and delete the keyframes. As I said, I want to add in some animation on my knee targets, just because for my front view I want to keep the knees kind of tucked in. So I'm going to go back to my global gizmo orientation, and then on frame 1 I'm going to move it in a little bit, and in fact I'll just move both of them in on frame 1. Let's see how that looks. I think right there. So on each of the passing poses, I'm going to have it not quite so much. Let's zoom in so I can see this one. That one doesn't quite matter so much. And so on this one, I don't mind the way this looks so much. And then on this one, I want that knee to come in. And I'm not so worried about the other one. And then I don't want that knee to be in anymore. Oops, that's the wrong one. Yeah, let's see how that looks. And I think what I need to do is duplicate that keyframe to the end, just so that it's not hopping around so much. Otherwise you won't get a very good loop. In fact, where is it there? I'm just going to move it over a little bit so that it doesn't jump at all. You want to avoid it jumping at all when it gets to the end of the loop. It's doing a little bit of jerkiness there, but it's not too bad. So I think that will be it for this video. Again, in the next video, we'll be looking and using this exact walk cycle, making the character walk from point A to point B, and we'll be making this character walk on a path. But again, that will be it for this video. Please don't forget to like this video, click that thumbs up button if you learned something in this video, and subscribe to my channel if you want to see more videos like this one in Blender and in tech. Please check out my Facebook page at facebook.com/borencg, because there I post sort of sneak previews of what I'm working on next for my upcoming tutorials. But that will be it for this one. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.